Hello and welcome to the Windy City's finest, on location with Clark and Perry. I'm Perry, he's Clark, and we are joined today, right now, by Kimberly Sibbald of Seven Skies Astronomy. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you, first of all, for inviting us into your home, into your space, and just allowing us to kind of spend time with you and get to know you. And yeah, I think our first question for our little interview here is just around kind of inspiration. And I'm going to preface it really quick because we had the opportunity to kind of shadow one of your workshops. And one thing that I really appreciated was that the first thing you kind of did with everybody, other than get everybody situated and comfortable, was you kind of asked everybody what their inspiration was for being there. And yeah, I think it's something that we'll come back to quite a bit throughout kind of your feature of Seven Skies. And so is there like a specific moment or something that kind of inspired this passion of yours?
Inspired the path that I'm on, the trajectory, yes. Great to have you back in the house. Yeah, when I do the workshops, I really like to understand why people are there. What made them choose to come to my workshop? A lot of people are into photography, landscape photography, but they're choosing to do something a little different and step out of their comfort zone. So asking them what inspired them is always a great way for me just to make a connection with them and try and understand.
Yeah.
For myself, I've been doing landscape photography for a very long time, but I think that one defining moment that changed our lives for the better, was I was attending a wedding in Eureka, Montana for one of my girlfriends. So Laurie and I had gone down, taken a small telescope in our setup. We had just bought this in advance of that eclipse moment that we were going for in August. So this was June or July of 2017. We set it up at the campground that we were staying at, out in the middle of nowhere, dark skies, and we thought, well, we're just going to try, see what we can get. Set it up. I strapped my Canon 5D Mark II on the back, turned the ISO up to ridiculous, and we took a 2-minute exposure just to see what we got. Well, all of a sudden, the Whirlpool Galaxy showed up on the back of the screen. Laurie and I were high-fiving and dancing around like we had just won $1 million lottery. And I think it was that moment that inspired both of us to continue on with this. It was that, just seeing that and knowing that you can capture something like that. And like I said, people say change your life too often, but it really did change our lives. It got us down the path of doing astrophotography in the backyard and then eventually picking up and moving.
And I love that because it's a memory that you had together. And one thing that we've kind of had the chance to see is that, yeah, you kind of do this together, you work well as a team. And so I really appreciate that aspect of it. And so this was in Montana. And so, like, is that something that you have seen again since that date? Like, is that something you can see here?
All the time, yes.
All the time.
So the galaxy is up. We haven't done a lot of galaxy work, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that was our first moment, and we probably should. We should go back and start doing more galaxies.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. I think our next question for you here is just, what do people learn about you with time?
With time. I think people learn that I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and that I'm not going to do something halfway. I'm not going to put out sort of substandard quality in my perspective. So I persevere and I beat myself up until I get it exactly right.
Well, I think it shows just in what we've had the chance to kind of see and work with you on. And I guess if I were to dig a little deeper, like, where do you think that comes from? Is there other things you've done in life that maybe comes from, or relationships?
I think that's a good segue, yeah. I am an accountant as part of my career, my professional career, and I think that attention to details, you have to be so detail oriented. That's the brain, that side of my brain that I use on the creative side as well. Yeah. And
it sounds like, you kind of have the opportunity to use that with astrophotography and photography in general, I'm sure. Can you speak a little bit more to like that creative side and where that kind of came from? Or
I think the creative side is a great outlet. We all get a little bit buried in our jobs and it gets stressful and you get down a little rabbit hole, or we sometimes say we're peeling onions back and finding all these layers. This is a great outlet for your brain just to de-stress and to get away from all of that. So it's really important for me to make sure I always keep that creative side going. And I know that when I'm getting too stressed, I start to drift away from creativity, and I know I have to draw myself back in.
Nice. Oh, there's so much in there, but I think our next question is, what is like an experience or adventure other than Montana and the Galaxy Whirlpool?
Yeah, the Whirlpool, you got it.
Yeah. Other than that, like, what's another adventure or experience that you've been fortunate enough to have?
We were very fortunate. We ended up in Tanzania in 2019. By then we had learned how our equipment worked. We had sort of a portable setup. So Laurie and I took our entry-level mount and our entry-level telescope and then set it up in Tanzania. So to be south of the equator is a very different view of the universe than to be north of the equator, and we're quite far north. Tanzania was 3 degrees south.
Yeah.
So that comes with its own challenges. What you do in the northern hemisphere to get your equipment polar aligned, you can't do down south. It's very different. So that we had to overcome all those challenges, and just seeing the night sky. The moon even. We all look up at the moon and we see it every night. You go down there, the moon is opposite. It is reversed. And it's just, you sit there and you think, that just doesn't look right. And why doesn't it look right? And it takes you a minute to realize why it doesn't look right. And it's upside down.
Oh, interesting. Oh my gosh, that's like messing with my mind right now.
It does. And when you're sitting in a lawn chair looking up and you don't know that that's what's happening, you know there's something wrong, and you look at it and your brain tries to rationalize what is wrong with it.
Yeah. I think, and honestly, what you just said there kind of inspired a question here around, you know, I think human beings generally, I know I do, you know, we have a tendency to try and rationalize things. And when I think of space, it seems a little irrational, you know, just the scale of it all and just what's out there. And I don't know if that inspires any thoughts for you, but that was just kind of an observation of, again, with the creativity side of things and the more kind of detail-oriented, I just think, I don't know, I just find that interesting.
It absolutely inspires a lot. So, you know, if you look up and realize how small we are in the universe and how vast the universe is, and you start, you know, it takes away the politics, the sports, the stresses. You forget about all of that and you put yourself somewhere else, and it's really a therapeutic moment.
Yeah, therapeutic, and I think Laurie kind of summarized this at one point where I think he said for him, and we'll kind of talk to him as well, but it was that idea of, regardless of your political leanings or what you believe, it's like one of those things that we all have in common. You know what I mean? Is that we all have a sky above us and, you know, ground beneath us. And I don't know. Yeah.
Agreed.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. But that's part of, you know, too many of us spend too much time looking down at our phones or our laptops or, you know, our tablets. We're looking at those. Start looking up.
Yeah. Start looking up. Nice. Together.
Yeah.
Together. And I think that's, you know, something I'm picking up on. It just a small example is between yourself and Laurie, and then what I see you're trying to do with the workshops, and just like getting groups of people together and looking up.
Yes.
I think that's awesome.
And then they take those photos home and they inspire their kids or their grandkids or their friends, and then more and more people will start looking up.
Yeah. Awesome. I think my next question is just in regards to, you know, how do you cope when things get tough?
When things get tough, it's all about perseverance, persistence. Laurie calls it persistence, I call it perseverance. You just don't let something beat you. You have to take a breath, maybe step back from it, and I do that once in a while. If I'm doing some processing and it's a really hard topic or target that I'm going after, I'll process for 3 or 4 hours and I'll step away from it. And maybe I sleep on it again before I go back to it. It's perseverance.
Perseverance. Yes, which is different from patience. I believe, right?
It is very different.
Yeah. What is different about those two things? I think we kind of touched on it at a different time a little bit, but the difference between patience and persistence, I think you kind of got it a little bit with the idea of not letting something beat you or not wallowing in a situation, you know, not being afraid to take that step back or go and sleep on it. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that. But.
I think a little bit of that. Patient people might ask for help more quickly. Patient people might just give up. They might just say, okay, this is beyond what I can do and I'm going to walk away from it. Perseverance, you're not going to give up, and you are going to ask for help, and you're going to struggle through it. And those struggles are always learnings.
Right.
So a lot of times I talk about, you know, you need to make mistakes to learn. If you never make a mistake, you're never going to learn.
You're not going to learn.
You have to go out to the field and leave your lens cap on and try and focus and go, why is this not working? I just can't understand it. And then you realize, my lens cap is on. Right. This is why I can't see a star. Absolutely,
yeah. And then you come up with your own processes, you know what I mean? You kind of, through trial and error, not just successes, you kind of come up with your process and how you do things. let alone, and then you move on to having 3 telescopes going all at once.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then, another example of that is I had a student ask me, why don't I just turn my ISO up really high so that I can see the foreground and, compose my image and then do that. And I said, you should do that. But learn from my mistake where I did that once and I forgot to turn the ISO back down. So now I have these super noisy images and my night was basically a waste.
Right.
So it's always learning something.
Yeah, learning something.
Those experiences stick with you.
Yeah. And I really appreciate, I think something I've kind of picked up quite a bit is that idea of you can always learn something from someone too. And I think I've heard that a few times of just like, you may have a certain amount of experience or know so much, but you can always learn something from someone else, be it a mistake. And sometimes I know for myself, I can't always just hear that somebody's had a mistake. I do need the right time and place, you know what I mean, to hear it and actually process it.
That's right.
And yeah, I think I really appreciate that. I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, but.
Well, I think just back to what I'd originally said, you've got to make mistakes to learn. That's how people grow.
Yeah, nice. I'm just curious, does that kind of stem from like accounting? Because I'm terrible at math. So I don't know, but I understand math, like there's usually a right and a wrong. And so is it more easier to kind of know when you've made a mistake? And how does that translate to astrophotography, where there is that kind of creative element of like, what's wrong and what's right is maybe a little more grayed? I don't know.
It absolutely is. So, accounting is very black and white. There's some gray areas where we push the rules a little bit. Math is very black and white. There's a right answer and a wrong answer. Yeah. Photography, it's very gray because what you think is perfect and is your mind's eye is not mine. You might choose to do something a little more saturated than I would do or vice versa. So it's very gray in photography, other than those major mistakes where you leave your lens cap on.
Sure.
That's a black and white moment.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. I feel like that's something I would do for sure, is leave the lens cap on a few times before
We've all done it, especially at night when you're out there and, summer Milky Way season is from about 12:30 at night until 2:30 in the morning. You're tired, you're fatigued, you're excited because you're seeing something, and you will just make those mistakes.
And like, kind of building on that is that idea of like a phrase we kind of came up with is that the universe doesn't wait, and something I picked up on is that there's only so many opportunities to see the thing, and if the weather isn't cooperating, your opportunities reduce even further, and so on and so forth. And so I think that is kind of, for me, speaking to that idea of persistence and being like, kind of that dance with the weather and dance with the conditions. And
And what you're saying there, the universe doesn't wait. There's another great analogy there. A very good friend of mine had once said to me that even if you don't get the image, take in the moment. Step back from the camera. You're struggling, you're frustrated, something is not going well on the camera. Right. Step away from it and actually see it with your eyes. And think about that moment and remember that moment. You've got the picture in your head. You may not be able to share it on social media, but you've got it.
Yeah. Have you seen the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty?
I haven't. No.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, there's a photographer in that movie, and there's just a beautiful moment where he's like photographing a snow leopard, but he doesn't take the picture. And he's talking with the main character, and he's like, sometimes I just like to, like, it's just for me, And I don't know, that's what that's
That's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. I think my next question, moving along, is just, how do you celebrate when life's going smoothly? When you take the lens cap off and, you know what I mean? The weather's cooperating, or just elsewhere in life. How do you celebrate?
Laurie and I call those boring moments. And boring astrophotography is what you strive for all day long.
Right.
You've got 3 telescopes that are running, or 3 cameras, or even 1 camera running. Celebrating boring. So everything is working, there are no hiccups, nothing is going wrong. You just sit back and enjoy the piece.
Right, and sit back in that moment a little bit for yourself as well.
Yes, there's no stress right now. Everything is working perfectly. So just, sit back, breathe in, and enjoy.
I really love that sentiment of striving for boredom.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times it's kind of flipped where we're striving to be busy and we're striving to do this and do that and blah, blah, blah. So there's something really special about that sentiment of striving for boredom, which is just when things are working. Yeah.
When everything's working. And something I tell my team all the time in the professional career is celebrate the moment. We're very quick to say, that project's done, let's move on to the next one. And we never take that moment just to sit back and think, hey, we completed something, and that's pretty cool. So same thing, boredom. You've completed something, take that moment to be bored and enjoy it.
Nice. A somewhat natural segue, I guess, would be like other interests and hobbies that maybe you would engage in for that purposes of boredom. You know, you finish the project and you can relax. What kind of interests or hobbies do you have outside of your professional life and your passion for astrophotography? What else is there, if anything?
I'm a sucker for making things difficult on myself. And I love golf. So another hobby or sport, I guess, that is challenging. You always have to practice it. You've got to continue to refine your swing, and you'll figure it all out, and you'll go out there and it'll all fall apart. And you're just, what has happened? What is going wrong? So,
Interesting.
I don't know why I choose all these things that are so hard.
You're a high achiever, I guess.
Must be.
And something I love about these things that I'm kind of picking up on is that idea of like, you have to go do them. Like, you have to go take the photos. You have to go swing the golf club. There we go.
Not a golfer.
Not a golfer at all. I always call them bats because in England, I think. Anyway, well, that's a long story. But you have to go do the thing. And so there's that element of like practice as opposed to just, theory and learning. It's kind of, learning through practice. Nice. Unless you have any more thoughts on that.
On golf, no. I just wish I could be better at it, and I'm going to continue to practice.
Awesome. I think my last question is just, what are your kind of future aspirations and goals, be it for, Seven Skies Astronomy or just in your personal life?
I think our personal life is very tied to our astronomy life. We do a lot of that. It's at our home, obviously, and Laurie and I spend a lot of time together. So personal goals there are just getting our equipment working as well as we can, photographing or imaging targets that aren't the usual. They're not all the ones that you see all over Facebook or astronomy. We did a quasar a little while ago, things like that that are just unique and different. So chasing those sort of targets. The supernova remnants, again, same thing. I love chasing those sort of objects.
Nice.
So it'll just be building on what we have.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just want to pick up on that phrase of chasing these kind of goals, and just because it brings to mind that idea of like the journey versus the product, as it were, and as satisfying as it is to kind of get that photograph or something. I appreciate the value you seem to place on that journey and just doing the things.
The experience, the journey and the experience, not just the product at the end. It's great to look on the wall and say, wow, I did that and we got that, but it's the experience of those 8 nights sitting there trying to get it, and the struggles and the peaceful moments, the boring moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the 8 hours of the telescopes working and then stacking like the milliseconds on milliseconds, and very interesting. Well, I think that is all the time we have for this part of the segment. So thank you so much for your time and energy. And thank you so much for tuning in. If you're on the live stream, stay tuned. If you're watching through Telesoptic TV or otherwise, feel free to check out another episode. Otherwise, this has been the Windy City's Finest on location with Clark and Perry. I'm Perry, he's Clark, and this is Kimberly Sibbald.
Hello and welcome everybody once again to the Windy City's Finest on location with Clark and Perry. I'm Clark, he's Perry, and we are of course joined once again with Kimberly Sibbald with Seven Skies Astronomy. Thank you again so much for being here and with us.
Great, it's great to have you back again. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm very excited for this particular part of the segment as well, because we kind of get to break down a little bit of typically your bread and butter when it comes to Seven Skies, the workshops, the astrology workshops. I'm a little curious if you could speak a little bit as to like what we kind of cover throughout those times.
Absolutely. The Milky Way workshops that we do are done from dark sky sites around southeastern Alberta. And we spend a little bit of time going through sort of the technical side, and then we learn how to focus, and then we get people out in the field actually first of all, looking at the Milky Way with their eyes and understanding what it is, and then we build on that and we get them taking some images of the Milky Way.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, that can be a full-bodied process. And I remember when we were out there, that like we spent pretty much the entire night kind of getting prepared, but also there was like an hour segment where where there was a lot of instruction going on. So I'm kind of curious as to like what you need to share with people participating. Like what are the things that they need to kind of consider and keep in mind as well? That's
a great question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of photography workshops where people will take you to locations. So it's destination based and they'll just turn you loose and say, go and do whatever you want. I do a little bit different approach where it is destination based, but I always do at least an hour of coaching first. Why are we here? What are the fundamentals? What are the things you really need to know to be successful? The worst thing for me would be to have somebody go away with no images at all.
Right.
I want people out there, I want them going, oh, wow, wow, wow. There's a term that we use for it. It's called chimping.
Yeah, okay.
When you look at the back of your camera and you go, ooh, 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 like it sounds like a monkey. Those are the things I want to hear out in the middle of the night in the dark, is people making those noises.
Yeah,
then I know I've been successful.
That makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, no, I remember there was some really great chances where I think we did hear a little bit of that as well, like, oh, eureka moments, right? Like they were like, oh yes, I made the discovery. So I really appreciate and want to acknowledge further about that coaching method as well. Like you have a lot of experience working with many different levels of photographers that come to these workshops as well. What would you say, like on your, like, what would you say is always something that they take away overall, I think, when they participate in your workshop?
For sure. There's absolutely different levels. There's people that are just learning how to use their camera. Some people show up and they bought the camera 2 days ago, so we're really starting at the very beginning. And then there's some experienced photographers who've been doing it a very long time, but haven't spent a lot of time out doing night photography. And I think that's the challenge. So teaching people how to overcome the challenges of night photography is the biggest thing people will take away. The number one thing that I harp on the most is focus. And of course, we know that from our deep space imaging. If it's not focused, it's garbage. It's the same thing with wide field. If you come away with big bloomy stars, it's not going to be a great image.
Yeah, so I know, so referencing back to some of our previous segments, we have a very sophisticated setup just sitting right behind me right now when it comes to like deep space photography. I'm kind of curious, like, and I'm trying to center my question around the, oh goodness, what was that that part we called it yesterday? It was it's the base of the telescope to kind of keep it with the curvature.
The equatorial mount.
Equatorial mount. Thank you so much.
We're going to have these guys so trained on astrophotography here when you leave.
I know what it is. I can't remember what it was called though. But yeah, so I'm kind of curious with the equatorial mount on the telescopes here. Would we need something similar, and if we do, what is the strategy to kind of what is the what is the equivalent of the equatorial mount for the basic camera setup, which we have referenced?
We have one here. Basic equipment for Milky Way is a lot of what you have. There's nothing special that you need other than you need a DSLR camera.
Okay.
We can't do this, well, I shouldn't say we can't. I don't do it with iPhones or any other phones.
That's fair.
There are settings that you can do with your cell phone that will actually get something of the Milky Way, but it's not what I'm trying to teach. So you need a DSLR, basic or expensive one, doesn't matter. A wide angle lens, and when we're talking wide angle, anywhere from that 14, 15 mil, this one has a 15 mil on it, all the way up to about a 24 is what we consider wide for Milky Way.
And for myself, that is not a photography person whatsoever as well. Like, what would be considered too narrow? It would be that anything like around that 10 millimeter range?
That's even better. So those millimeters as they go down means they're wider.
Oh,
it's counterintuitive again.
Okay.
Yeah, so a 10 millimeter focal length means it's very, very wide. You're getting more and more of the scenery. As you get higher focal lengths, you get less and less of the scene.
Gotcha. Okay.
So 10 would be great.
Perfect.
Anywhere up to about 24. A tripod, a sturdy tripod, so not one of the little ones that you would put your cell phone on. Again, you need a nice sturdy tripod.
Maybe not the monopod we use for
Probably
these setups,
not the monopod,
right?
no.
That's fair.
And a cable release. So this is so that you can actually take multiple exposures.
Yeah, because it's very important, I think, from what I learned with the cable release was that it's very important not to touch the camera when you're actually, once you're set up and once you're in the location, you don't want to touch the camera, even to press the click button.
The shutter button,
right?
exactly.
Just because you're going to alter like
you cause
just
a
the
little
position.
vibration,
Yeah.
and that will make your stars look a little bit non-round. It could make them elongated or a little bit jiggly.
Yeah.
If you don't have a cable release, though, don't run out and buy one.
Right.
You can use a 2-second timer. So you set the 2-second timer, you push the shutter button, the camera will count to 2 before it actually exposes the image. That gives it a moment to settle down after you've touched it and caused a little vibration in the camera.
Okay, sweet. So like these cameras have a way, the 2-second timer is more than enough time to allow that picture to be taken.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah. So like I said, so going back a little bit to the workshop as well too. I really appreciate the coaching mentalities as well in regards to like many different levels of photographers as well. Yeah, when it comes to night photography, what are some of those things that experienced photographers might need to consider when going in?
Just going back to the challenges of night photography. So night photography, there's no ambient light, or there's limited ambient light. Those are the things that are tough to overcome. Even your most experienced photographer isn't going to have what I call muscle memory. I need you to know where those buttons are on your camera in the dark without turning a light on.
Right.
So even the most experienced person is going to fumble around and say, well, I don't know where my zoom button is. I don't know where my playback button is.
Yeah.
So we spend about 45 minutes of getting muscle memory. Just where are those buttons? How do I start working my camera?
Yeah.
Mentally, not visually.
Yeah, no, that's a very good way to put it as well. I could certainly, you would expect somebody who is like experienced in photography to know everything about their own camera as well. But like when rubber hits the road, when it's in the dark, can you? So I really appreciate like that specific look onto like where the buttons are and
they will fumble around as much as somebody who just bought the camera 2 days ago.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very interesting to see that because when we use our eyes, we know where all that stuff is. But when you take it out, now you've got 5 buttons on the back. Is it the lowest one? Is it the second lowest one? You've got to memorize that.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And we had enough time to kind of go out at the workshop. So we had this hour worth of instruction and then kind of like a moment of exploration as well too. Could you tell me a little bit of like that extra time for exploring kind of that Red Rock Coulee area?
It's a great question. People will look at the workshop and say, why do we start at 7 o'clock when the Milky Way doesn't come up till 12 or 12:30? What is the point of wasting all this time? Well, like we said, we do the 1 hour of instruction. Then I take people down and show them where they're going to be. What you see in daylight is nothing of what you're going to feel in the dark. And people really appreciate understanding what their surroundings look like in daylight and mapping that to their brain so that they know when they're stumbling around in the dark. Oh, I remember those boulders were there, or I remember this big walk up the hill here. Yeah. You've got to show people their surroundings before you just throw them into the dark.
Yeah, it's a primary safety thing right there, right?
It really is.
No, and I really appreciated that as well too because it was very dark
it's very
when it
dark.
when it got to the prime time and we had everybody in that like beautiful line getting ready to take photos of the Milky Way. Yeah, it was quite dark.
I went on a workshop once when we were doing multiple locations, so there was just no way to actually see all the locations first because it was get in the car and drive to the next one. But we did end up at one location. I want to say it was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was absolutely jet black dark, and I knew that we were on the edge of a cliff, and the cliff was 3,000 feet down.
Ooh.
I was terrified, and I never want to do that to somebody in my workshop, as being that terrified to actually hurt yourself.
Yeah, no, because I mean, end of the day, it's you want to be able to go home to share those photos that you just took, right?
Well, and I'm in charge of the safety while we're out there. I want people to remain safe.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit more in detail some of the ambient light and some of the lighting choices that we had at the workshop. Red lights, red lamps were kind of the main tool that were being used throughout the workshop. Could you explain just a little bit as to why that was?
Absolutely. It's a great question. People ask why red headlamps all the time. White light in the dark will make your pupils constrict.
Right.
Right. So our pupils get very small and now we can't see. We lose our night sight.
Yeah.
What we have to do is turn that white light out, and it takes about 20 minutes for our eyes to adjust again to the darkness.
Gotcha.
So letting those pupils dilate again, make them very big. Red light doesn't have the same effect as white light, so it allows you to increase your ambient light you can see, but it isn't going to make those pupils constrict the same way that they would with the white light.
We're going to have a later segment talking more specifically, I think, about light as well, like during our school programming piece. But just a quick question for me, like when it comes to the difference between red and white light, this is an ignorance question on my end, but the sun is certainly like portraying white light. to become red, just going through a filter is totally fine, or is there a specific?
You can buy headlamps and or flashlights that are red light.
Right. Okay.
They're red, like the lights that we have up in here. They're red.
Yeah. Perfect. Yep. Okay. Sweet. So yeah, that kind of helps reduce the amount of time to redilate essentially. But regardless, it still requires your eye to constrict a little bit, and similarly so to the camera. So during the workshop, despite still using the red headlamps, it still wasn't, when it was time to go dark, even the red headlamps wouldn't necessarily be on all the time, right?
Correct.
So,
we would use the red headlamps just to move to a new spot to set up our composition. We could shine the red light on the rocks so we knew where we were. We turn everything off when we start doing the actual imaging.
Yeah.
Red light in a astro image ruins it. It's very, very hard to get red light out.
That's very interesting. So it's the best in regards to like just like sensor agitation or like that constriction of your eye, but it's very difficult to edit out.
It's very difficult.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, it's a really kind of like risk analysis right there that you're kind of like playing around with too, but certainly the interesting piece. Yeah, so I'm kind of interested to know a little bit more about some of the a little bit about the lighting when it came to the workshop, because I know eventually at some point, once we established like where the line was going to be, I think everybody had gone and parked their cars so that headlights were pointed even further away. So when it comes to, I'm gonna ask the question more specifically on like if you have lights, like let's use this camera for an example. If I'm standing just behind it and I shine a light this direction, is that still going to interrupt its exposure?
It will.
Okay.
It absolutely will. So if we have rocks over there, you shine a white light, it's going to light those rocks up. So it's going to change what a dark midnight scene would look like into more of a daylight scene. And that was the reason I asked people to park their cars facing the other way.
Yeah.
I'm happy to stay out as late as people want to stay. Some people prefer to leave a little bit earlier. So I would help them back to their car. But as soon as they turn their headlights on, I want the headlights pointing away from where we are actually imaging. I don't want any light painting going on.
So it may not be the source of light, but even reflecting off of the other like grasses and rocks and debris might interrupt that exposure as well too.
When you're in a very dark site, it doesn't take very much light to change what you're seeing. You'd be so surprised.
Okay, so that makes a lot more sense too, because I wasn't too sure exactly if it was like the source of light is going to be the primary thing, but even when you're out in the pitch black night and you've had a chance to dilate, even reflections of light can kind of interrupt that. That makes a lot of sense to me as well too. Perfect. Yeah. So I was wondering to talk a little bit about so we've had a chance to establish like our setting there, the instruction. We've had a chance to kind of like talk a little bit about the pre-setup before like night sky actually takes over. When the night sky has taken over, we had a chance to kind of go up to like a higher location and kind of started setting up and playing around with some of the different features as well. Now, with many different people owning different cameras, we're not going to get into the comparison of that type of stuff for this segment, or any segment. But I was kind of curious if there is like a list of things that are always constant all throughout as well too.
No matter what camera.
Yeah, and if we could speak more to that too.
Sure. They're what we call the pillars of astrophotography. There's 3 pillars. It'll be unique, not unique to any camera. Everybody will have the same pillars. So we talk about we're always in manual mode. We cannot let our camera be in automatic mode because it will choose the wrong thing. It always will.
Right. And automatic mode, just for my clarity's sake as well too, is if like your camera is automatically focusing on other items. Is that right in the image?
Actually, there's 2 types of auto.
Okay.
Good question.
Perfect.
So
Excellent.
I'm describing the camera auto, not the lens auto. So you're talking lens auto focusing. We turn that off too. Everything has to be 100% manual.
Excellent.
You need your lens to be on manual focus, and you need your camera to be on manual controls.
Okay.
So once we've set it to manual controls, it means you have complete control over everything that the camera is doing. And that's those 3 pillars. We need to have control over our aperture, our shutter speed, and our ISO.
And the ISO. And for myself and other viewers that may be new to this as well too, ISO, what is that?
That is the sensitivity or how much your sensor picks up the light and amplifies the light. So it's an amplification of the light coming through the lens and through the duration of having the shutter open.
Gotcha. Okay, sounds good. So they're the ones that essentially capture the light in the camera and are able to kind of translate it into the image, essentially, that's going to be saved? Okay, perfect.
So it's sort of, if you step back just a little bit, if we talk about aperture, so that is how wide my lens will go open. How big is the hole to allow the light to come through?
Gotcha, okay.
So we talk about f-stops, those are our apertures. An f1.4 has a very big hole in my lens. As I stop it down, it gets a smaller and smaller hole. So the hole allowing the light to come through gets smaller and smaller.
Gotcha.
For night photography, we want it open, as wide as we can get it, within reason, to allow as much light through the lens as possible. The second thing is the shutter speed. So we want to have a long shutter speed to allow as much light through that hole for as long as possible.
And that shutter speed literally is the shutter that is just taking the photo.
That's right.
Essentially, right? Like the click that you hear in it.
Exactly.
So that's very interesting to me because in my seat right now, again, not knowing much about cameras and night photography, but the shutter speed to me wouldn't necessarily matter if it was just this, but it allows, the slower it is, the more chances you have those photons to enter that sensor.
That's right. So what you're hearing is the quick click click normally because you're taking a very quick exposure. What I'm suggesting is you're opening up the shutter and you're letting it sit there for 10, 15, 20, even 30 seconds before the click happens again.
Gotcha. Okay. I understand now. Sweet. So it's that time in between the shutter. Okay.
That's right. The curtain's opening and closing. So you're allowing light to go through the lens. You're allowing the time that light is allowed to go through the lens. Then it hits the sensor and the sensor will then amplify that light through the ISO.
Okay.
Those are the three things that we have to get right for astrophotography. Generally, your aperture, how big that hole is going to be a standard. You're going to pick an f2.8 and f3.2. So we'll stick with that all night. The next thing is going to be our shutter speed. 10, 15, 20, even 30 seconds, you'll choose that as well. So those two are kind of the ones that you can't mess around with. Once you have those two identified, then you pick your ISO that allows for the best image.
And this ties it all together pretty much.
This ties it all
well.
together.
Okay.
So you're looking at an ISO anywhere from about 1600 all the way to 6400, maybe even a little bit higher. But your ISO will be based on the other two selections that you made.
Okay, perfect. And you go through the coaching on those three pillars like throughout everybody as well too.
That's
just
right.
to kind of...
And we do it on camera specific. So everybody's going to have a slightly different sensor sensitivity. They're going to have different lenses. You know, if what I can do with a 15 mil, you can't do with a 24 mil on shutter speed. So I make sure each student has the right tools.
Yeah, and I mean, we even had a couple of individuals, and I would imagine you've experienced many individuals show up with like a phone as well too. So I'm imagining there's a lot of is there a lot of similarities, or is there a lot of difference when it comes to, say, like the phone cameras versus the XLR?
DSLR.
So DSLR. Close. Oh, got it. Almost there.
The phone cameras, it's difficult because you can't control the aperture as well, and you can't control the shutter speed. Some of them will let you control them. There was one gentleman who had a phone with him that he was able to get quite, you know, he could actually see the Milky Way, which is great. The problem with your phone cameras is they're great on the phone screen. You come home and put them on the computer screen, they get very grainy, they're very pixelated, they're not meant to blow up the pictures. If you think you want to create an image that's something you want to hang on your wall, you've got to go with the camera.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense as well too. There's just more customizable options when it comes to the actual DSLR cameras. There we go. Yes.
Got it.
Perfect. Okay, so we kind of had that opportunity to kind of be in that location to set up the cameras, and it was by like a lovely picnic table, and then a little bit down the way is where we were going to actually set up. Now, I guess my next question is that while we were experimenting and getting ourselves prepared up there, why didn't we just go and make our home in the position where we were going to be at in that line? Yeah.
I like to keep everybody in a tighter group, you know, up high, close to their cars, close to their gear, in case there's something we've forgotten.
Yeah.
So part of that, after the golden hour, after sunset, after exploring around, we start learning how to focus.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest part of the workshop, is making sure that everybody gets tight focus on their stars. I want people to have round stars. But it'll mean, oh, I've got the wrong lens, or oh, I forgot my memory card, or you know, people have forgotten certain things and they need to run back to their car, so I don't want them running up and down the hill 6 times.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. So yeah, essentially what we had up there was just that full prep and a chance to kind of go back and forth. And because, well, like I saw that we were focusing on the Polaris star. There we go, the North Star. So we had a chance to kind of focus on that, but I didn't realize at the time that it was just kind of preparation. It was just set up for then we're going to make the position and then go be ready as well too.
The other thing is, as much as I stress it in emails, people don't understand how cold it's going to be out there.
Yeah.
So I like them to stand up there and stand still for about 45 minutes practicing focus, and then they realize, I do need my toque, I do need my gloves, and they will run back to their car and get it.
Yeah, I will admit, it was fantastic conditions for us to be out there. Like, there was no wind or anything, but even still, like, I'm glad I brought my toque and my windbreaker and such, because I was on the verge. There were a couple times where I was like, yeah, you know what? If the wind was up, I'd probably be cold.
It'd be miserable. And there's nothing that makes you lose your interest more than being cold. As soon as you get cold hands, cold feet, you don't want to do it anymore.
Well, yeah, I could only imagine you're out there and you're freezing, and then you finish and you're like, okay, I decided to be persistent, and then you get home and then you find out that, oh yeah, your photos, or you had forgotten the 3 pillars to do that prep as well too, and you're like, shoot. So yeah, well, it was very humbling for us to like have like I think it was like a 23-degree day essentially, and then it was like all of a sudden like in the evening at that midnight hour, and with you holding still as much as you were, it felt like it was like almost like 5 degrees or something.
I would say it feels like 0. It is cold, especially when you're standing still. Yeah. And your hands as well. You're dealing with a metal tripod and a metal camera. It gets really cold.
I remember carrying the monopod around with me too, and I was like, man, this thing is just as frozen as I am. Like, or it's just freezing my hand to it. So yeah, no, that was interesting. Okay, so yeah, let's talk a little bit about focusing as well too, if we have the chance and opportunity as well. A lot of time was spent in the preparation before we got into the position in that line on focusing on the Polaris. What are some of the things that we had to kind of consider or talk about when it came to that? There were a lot of folks that were having some difficulty finding it, and then we had a couple of eureka moments where they did find it and all that. So maybe could you comment a little bit on some of that journey there?
Sure. That was great, and we did have a couple of those eureka moments.
Yeah.
There was one individual that was, the camera was pointing exactly at Polaris.
Yeah.
Couldn't get couldn't see Polaris. Why can't I see it? Why can't I see it? The problem was we were so out of focus that a tiny little star just turns into nothing in the night sky, right? It's a bluish night sky and a white dot, but when it's out of focus, so instead of having a tiny little spot, it's this big blob, it just blended in.
Gotcha.
So as soon as we turned the focus to infinity, so we were close, not perfect, all of a sudden the star showed up. And that was the eureka moment.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing the focusing, if I can stand up here just for a second, what I'm trying to do with people is we'll have the camera set up, and if Polaris is there, what I'm doing is I'm setting my camera to approximately where I think Polaris is.
Yep.
And what I'll do is I'll stand behind it and pretend that my eyes are that lens, and I go like this and I say, is that star in there? Yes, it is. If the star is in there, by holding my hands up and saying, yes, I can see the star in that lens,
okay,
then I know my camera is pointing correctly. Now it's just focus. Do I need to go to infinity to have it show up in the back, or do I back off? And that was the problem, was she had it on close focus, not distant focus, so we couldn't see it.
Was trying to see the sun and not the universe beyond,
there you
essentially.
Go. That's right.
No, that's great. Okay, excellent. And so many people obviously, like, it's a pretty simple experience with this camera, but everybody's camera being very different. We spent about a half hour probably with everybody looking for that focus as well too. I thought the Polaris was a great star to focus on, obviously being the brightest one, that first one that kind of came out in that sky as well too. But what time was that around?
I think we were running about 11 o'clock before we could actually start, maybe 10:45.
Yeah.
When we could see Polaris was out, we could start focusing. As soon as I can get people to understand and how to focus, and we waited a little bit longer so that we could get more stars. And the camera's very sensitive. It'll pick up stars that your eye doesn't see.
Yeah.
So what I was hoping for is all the stars that are around Polaris start showing up in the frame.
Yeah.
And then we can make sure that we have a flat frame. So Polaris dead center, probably great focus. But as we move out, are my stars getting a little elongated? Are they still round? So that was what we spent another 20 minutes making sure that we had good flat stars from the center of the image all the way through.
Right, right. Yeah, it was very interesting for me because there were moments in the night where I was kind of like I had looked up and I was like, yeah, the stars are everywhere, and I saw like small clusters surrounding one star, but they were so dim to my eye that I was almost like, I need to like stand here for like 10 minutes and then just focus on those stars. I almost like tried to take the perspective of the camera and just be like, can I absorb more photons if I'm spending more time looking up there as well too? And I actually, it's speculating here, but I thought it did help a little bit when
well,
I
it
did.
does. You're getting
kind of
adjusted to it, and you're just paying attention to one spot. Your eyes will start to see more and more.
Yeah, yeah. So it was a fantastic experience being out there. It was really, really enjoyable to have the chance to kind of set up and get prepared. Oh, and I will get interrupted here real quick. It looks like we got a comment. Just Perry, what do we got?
Just in regards to dark sky sites
and
light pollution, if there's time.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that right now. We only got a few minutes left for this segment, so that is a perfect segue as well. Yeah, light pollution is a thing as well, and is something that we need to be very aware of as well. I remember specifically at Red Rock Coulee, there is, to the horizon, like many, many kilometers away, are these windmills that I think there was eventually, like when the sunset had kind of like finally gotten to that setting point, it almost looked like they were too far away to be any nuisance or anything, but then eventually they started having these very obvious looking red lights, for safety purposes and planes and all that such too. But yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of that light pollution, because that red light there was still something we didn't want to necessarily focus on or in that direction as well too.
So 2 points there. So one, just talking about dark sky sites for people. You have to get to a dark sky place in order to see the Milky Way or to photograph the Milky Way. It cannot be done from the city. A lot of people will say, oh, can you take a picture of the teepee in downtown Medicine Hat and put the Milky Way over it? No. It's just, you have to go to a dark sky site. It's the only way to see the Milky Way.
Gotcha.
Then talking about light pollution, when we were at Red Rock Coulee, to the very south are those windmills. So when I do my workshops, I'm actually looking to see what's on the horizon and what's going to interfere. So I can't do a workshop at Red Rock Coulee in August for the Milky Way, because the Milky Way will be directly above those windmills. And it is hundreds of red flashing lights, which is awful to get rid of. So we do Red Rock Coulee in May, where it's southeast. So we are looking away from those lights.
Gotcha. And that kind of ties into a lot of the discussions we've had in the various other segments of like, when's the right time to go out and do these things? So I think that's really great that you have not only Red Rock being so close by, but also being that dark sky that you can actually rely on, and then now and have the timing to kind of necessitate
and then
work with that too.
Just to go back to light pollution again, light pollution it's really awful for us. Us astrophotographers are a little hardcore on that. But it's just getting people to understand that when you put a yard light up or you put your house lights up, you don't need those bright LEDs shining at somebody. It's not necessary. Downward facing warm lights help everybody, and it'll help preserve a little bit of our night sky. I know it's hard to do that right now in the cities, but if a farmer puts up a new light, make it downward facing and make it warm.
Gotcha.
Businesses doing the same sort of things. That will help preserve the night sky for generations to be able to see the Milky Way.
Absolutely. So, like for myself at least, if you could talk a little bit more of what makes a night sky location. Because for me, I feel like there's a little bit of criteria that we need to be aware of as well too.
There is.
That helps kind of define that. Could you help me out with that?
There are several criteria. If we're talking about a night sky, and we'll talk about the Milky Way.
Yeah.
The Milky Way galactic core is only visible to us at 50 degrees latitude, where we're sitting right now.
Okay.
May through August. So that nice bright part of our of the Milky Way galaxy, the galactic core, is up above the horizon during May through August.
Gotcha.
So we have those 4 months that we can actually see it. The next criteria is you have to have a moonless night or a very small moon. The moon is like the sun, and it will wash the sky out. So if you've got the big full moon, you are not going to see the Milky Way.
It's a big reflecting rock.
It's a big reflecting rock. Yeah. So that's your second criteria. And then your third criteria is obviously clouds. If we have clouds of any variety, we're not going to see the Milky Way.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've taken 4 months of possibility, and we've taken it down to 1 week in each of those months for the moon not being around. And then we narrow it even more because of those 7 days, there's going to be clouds.
Sometimes a cloudy day. Like today is a cloudy day. Yesterday, like during those other segments with deep space and the solar segment as well too, we had the very great opportunity to still see a clear sky. So yeah, that is a lot to be to consider and keep in mind.
And then the last consideration is for the Milky Way. Again, if you happen to be near an urban center, you want to get south of that urban center into south dark skies, because the Milky Way is in our southern sky. So if you get south of the light pollution and you're facing south, you should have dark skies.
Perfect. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense as well. And again, just kind of explains a little bit more to me about the vast things that you've had to consider when finding this location and settling here for the most part. Yeah, no, that is amazing. Perry, do we have any more comments or questions as well? Okay. How are we doing for time there, sir? Okay. Well, excellent. No, I really appreciate everything that you've been able to kind of to share with us as well, and it makes me very excited. I do want to touch on one more thing just before we wrap up this segment. Is so after the workshop, essentially after the evening, I would say, of taking the photos, you've had the chance to kind of do the coaching with the cameras and all that as well too. You've spent the evening out. The workshop's not done. We still have one more day. And this is, I think I had a great conversation with you where it's like, this is where the actual magic happens as well. Could you tell me a little, just briefly, real quick, because I know we're a little bit at time right now, about what would take place in that second day?
Sure. We do coaching just on how you now take those images that you captured the night before. We run them through the post-processing software. So there's a couple of pieces of software that I will teach people on how to bring out all those details, bring out the colors, and like make the magic, make them look wow.
Yeah, and utilizing the stacking techniques as well, and all that such as well too. So
we do a 3-hour session on that afterwards.
Great.
And again, people will say, why do I need 3 hours to make one picture? Well, number one, we're fighting fatigue. We've been up, probably didn't get to bed till 4 o'clock in the morning, and now I'm asking you to start again at 11 o'clock. So people are tired. So we move very slowly that day. We drink a lot of coffee and we step through things slowly, and we make sure everybody's successful. I will walk around to each person's laptop and help them pull the levers and make sure they're getting what they want.
Yeah, that's an amazing level of understanding as well too, because bright and early at the 11 it may not be bright and early, but it's 11 o'clock and bright and early to
it feels bright and early.
Yeah, it definitely feels like that as well too. Okay, well, perfect. Thank you so much as well for sharing everything. I think that's going to be all the time that we have to share right now as well. For those of you folks tuning in on the live stream, stay tuned, because we still have a couple more segments to still go as well. We're going to be doing a couple interviews with and features with Laurie as well, which I'm super excited about to have them back. But yeah, I think for the purposes of this, for those of you tuning in on the YouTube or Telesoptic TV, be sure to give a like and subscribe to the video as well. But for those of us watching right now, thank you again so much for tuning in. This has been the Windy City's Finest on location with Clark and Perry. I'm Clark, he's Perry, and this has been Kimberly Sibbald with Seven Skies Astronomy.
Thank you.
All of your time and energy. And yeah, I believe in this segment, we're going to kind of dive into just kind of how astral photography pertains to youth and the potential there, and why that's kind of important. And we have a lovely slideshow that we'll kind of go through and just kind of pick apart and dissect a little bit, and just kind of dive into this. So I think the first thing we have is, you guys' your name. That's awesome. And then the next thing is kind of gathering light for art and science is on the next slide. And so we'll might as well change that over there. And yeah, I think there's something in this sentence for you guys, and I'm just curious what that is. It's not necessarily just stars. It's light, right? Is there any way you can elaborate on that?
What are you looking at me?
Yeah, well, this was your saying. You came up with it, and I thought it was genius.
No, I mean the whole endeavor is about gathering light. We talked ad nauseum about it yesterday. The photons, the wavelengths of light everywhere, the electromagnetic spectrum, all that. We got a slide that shows that. But yeah, that's what the endeavor is, and what you do with that, and what it means to individuals about what they think the universe is all made of, or they haven't thought about it before, is what it can turn into. That's really what it's about.
Yeah, and I love that sentiment, because I think, especially for youth, I think at a certain point, your life is like your circle of friends, maybe your folks, depending on that relationship. And so at some point, though, I think everybody kind of has that point in their life where they realize, they're part of a community, part of, Southern Alberta, part of the fabric of a community, and I love the message behind this, because it's like, it can be bigger than that.
Yep.
And so, I really love the sentiment behind that. And I also love the inclusion of art and science. And we touched on this a little bit in your sit-down interview, Kimberly, of that kind of both sides of the brain, as it were, and that opportunity for science and art. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but how important that is for youth. Yeah.
I think what inspired this was the art. We were chasing those pretty pictures that I wanted, but it then gave us the tools to start chasing science as well. Laurie's got a scientific background, I don't, but the ability to do what we did for art meant that we could do science. We built all those skills that we needed for the art to make the art as good as we could, but those skills were transferable to science. And now starting to get kids to, again, keep saying the same thing, look up from their phones, stop looking down so much and look up. But they're looking up, what are they looking at? Yeah.
And do they know what they're looking at? Absolutely.
Yeah. And they have courses in school curriculums, in astronomy sections in science curriculums. But I guess what we're thinking about is offering schools, classes, whatever, motivated teachers, motivated leaders, like in, whether it's 4-H or Scouts and Girl Guides, Brownies, whatever, the motivated leaders that understand how important it is to expose kids. Because to me, the whole idea of a science education, STEM, whatever the new terms are, is to expose kids, younger people, to these ideas, these concepts. It's not to beat everything into them like a multiplication table memory. It's about inspiring them, exposing them, and that's really all what we're trying to offer is the ability to use our facility to do that, and to get kids understanding just the basics of light, how it works, how you focus it, what is happening with the basic components. And if you can inspire kids to do more, we're not trying to teach anything specific necessarily, but just inspire and let them have a basic understanding of light, and how you can use that to see incredible things in the universe.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this idea of exposing youth to something that they might not have even thought of before, and the way to do that is to be able to do it in various different ways.
Well, you guys experienced it, and I'm sure you'd seen. Maybe you hadn't. I don't know. You'd seen the Milky Way in a dark site. Yeah. There's kids that live in this very small hamlet next to us that have never seen the Milky Way. Right. You talk about light pollution. You talk about that. You need a certain level of darkness to look up and see that bright band that is the Milky Way, that is our galaxy. That's a starting point. That's a very important thing. You don't need anything except your eye. And that is just the essence of everything else. When you start aiding the eye with binoculars and telescopes and taking images and making the images sharper and more accurate, then that's all just an extension of that. Yeah, right?
It's kind of making it more accessible. And the kind of phrase I'm getting from this is that everybody has their own set of telescopes, or their own telescope in their head. You know what I mean?
In their head.
Yeah. And so
a lot for people who are lucky enough to be sighted, right?
Absolutely.
And all that, right? Yeah. Let's not forget everything else, but for that, and description of that to people that aren't.
Yeah, and we touched on this various times, but that idea of like, you know, the universe doesn't wait for you, so there's only certain times in the year, like for the Milky Way, I think we were saying there's a few months, and then that's whittled down to like by weather and other circumstances.
With the moon.
Yeah, the moon, right? And so yeah, there's like a lot of barriers, just natural barriers that we don't, you know, we can't control. And so it seems like, yeah, kind of sharing that with youth. So those are the hurdles that we can help and can control, you know, helping people understand, so that they can experience, and let their imagination run free.
I think as well, you're talking about the hurdles. There's other things that we can do, and the next couple of slides talk about that. There's daytime astronomy that we can do as well, and that's solar and lunar, which I think are the next couple of slides. So it's not like there's such, you know, narrow window for doing all of this.
Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah, we had the chance to kind of check out some solar imaging in a different segment. And I think this is super special because it's like one of those things where you cannot look at the sun unless you have certain equipment.
Disclaimer, never look at the sun with your eyeball or any piece of optical equipment that isn't specifically made for it and is safe, and that an adult that understands this stuff is safe.
Absolutely. And so it's like one of those things where I feel like we learn about it in theory, you know, but being able to kind of actually see solar imaging like we did the other day live.
That's exactly it. Theory in school, we've all been there. We get bored. You can put things on do they still use chalkboards? I don't know. They did in my day. But anyway, that you know, to see that, you can tune out. Unless you're an extremely motivated kid from the start that's seen things that inspire them already. This is what we're offering here is, and again, it's not a big structured thing or anything overly onerous. It's just an exposure of those kids to something that's in 3 dimensions in reality that demonstrates what they're maybe trying to learn in school.
Absolutely. And I'm going to like break off a little bit and kind of dive into that question of like, is this something that you wish you had in your youth? Or were you kind of exposed to like, you know, being able to see the Milky Way? Or is this something that you found later in life and are just so passionate about and want to share with youth? And we talk about, you know, light pollution and dark skies and preserving the sky for future generations and stuff. And so that's kind of a mumble jumble of things in there. But I don't know.
I can start. I didn't know there was a Milky Way when I was in school. We didn't learn about it. There was not an astronomy program. I learned it from, I was talking about my time, you know, on the West Coast, just looking up, but didn't realize what I was looking at. So we definitely came to it later in life for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interested in science and physics for a long time, so yeah, I knew about it. I never had any exposure to hands-on equipment or anything. Was never really a photographer or anything like that. But so yeah, the astronomy part, the hands-on astronomy part is definitely later in life. But yeah, the appreciation of the physics and the world, the universe, where we fit, I've known about for a while, just because of my background educationally.
Absolutely. And yeah, unless you have any more thoughts on that, I love. One thing I'm picking up is both highly motivated individuals and kind of like, I feel like the skills that I imagine would be important in those professions and how that translates to astrophotography. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that at all and how, again, you know, that can translate to youth and be useful in their life. I don't know.
Well, I think understanding, you know, basics of physics, optics, some computer knowledge, you know, all of that stuff comes together here. You can see is important. And I think just for astronomy, not getting on a soapbox, I think kids need to have a very strong background in technology and in science.
Yeah, especially nowadays.
No matter what they end up doing, you know, to be able to understand the world. And whether the energy or what other issues are out there, I think that's very important. And well, criticize. I think it's something that has to be much more emphasized.
And I think from, you know, stepping away from the science side of it, it's detail oriented. You've got to be down in the weeds. You've got to like the details.
Yeah. Devil's in the details. You know.
But in terms of kids, it's the exposure that's important and understanding. Like, I guess we're we want kids that are motivated to learn to come.
Yeah.
And they're leaders, whether they're teachers or others. And again, we're trying to just expose the kids to something. We're not trying to force anything down their throat in terms of, oh, you got to do this. No, it's just, isn't this cool? What do you think? If you think it's cool, great. Yeah. Maybe you'll go get a book. You'll read something online. You'll get more interested.
Yeah.
It's that simple, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of like there's a certain sentiment of like, you know, of like hearing something or listening to something and actually hearing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, even if they do hear it and they see it, it might not be like the right time, but still several years later,
whatever
it could click for them,
sure.
You know, and there's something in that for sure, absolutely. What's next on the thing? We got lunar imaging.
Yeah, we got the solar, we got the lunar. Again, this is the kind of presentation we can step through with groups, and we have done that. And just to kind of give an overview, and then we show the facility, we show the telescopes moving. Well, first of all, the roof rolling off, which is cool. We'll let the kid hit a button under supervision.
That was me.
Yeah, it was you. You were the kid yesterday. And allowing, you know, and they find that very cool, and how the telescopes move, how we can put up a planetarium program and point to a part in that program and say, hit this button, and the telescope will move there.
Yeah.
And then we explain the other parts of it. Usually you have to do it during the day because just logistics, right?
Yeah.
But we show all of that kind of stuff, and we could tailor it to a curriculum. But again, not to overemphasize, we haven't done a lot of this. We've sent out a bunch of invitations. We've had markets where we show some of our work and things, and there've been a lot of people that we've talked to and reached out to. The leaders and the teachers have to be motivated to get out of the damn classroom and out of the clubhouse and come out. You know, we're doing this happily for no compensation. We're just motivated to, as part of our community spirit, to allow youth groups to come in here and have a look, right? But it requires their leaders to want to do that, and to get away from that classroom paradigm and open it up.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Awesome. And sorry, just back to the lunar imaging. I think you know, it's something very close in our kind of solar system to our planet, probably the closest thing. And so again, just playing with like that idea of proximity, and that you know, there are stars billions of light years away, but there's close stuff too, that I don't know if there's an element of accessibility in that.
Absolutely there is.
Yeah.
Because you can see it again with your naked eye. You can use binoculars. You can use a camera phone for the moon. That works. It's fine. As long as you can keep it steady enough and do, you know, all that. And it's there, and all these incredible features are there to see. We can do more fancy techniques to get sharper images, but it's all there. It's a very important point. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of scale. Yeah. You know, the moon's are its nearest neighbor. It's around 250,000 or 400,000 kilometers away. Right. How does that relation to the Earth's size? All that's where it starts, and then the nearest star is 4 light years away. What's a light year? Well, it's the distance light travels in a year, and there's 4 of those to get to that nearest star, and then that goes up to all these objects in our Milky Way. That the Milky Way is about 200,000 light years across, and then the next scale is, where's the next galaxy? Well, that's probably about 1 million or so. That's Andromeda, and then you keep going and going, and you're trying to understand these scales, but it's all relative. You can get blown away by the actual sheer dimensions of time and space, but that's kind of where it starts, exactly, looking at the moon. What if we didn't have the moon? Well, you see those science fiction shows where you've got these multiple moons up, and you go, well, doesn't that be cool to live in? Well, we've got that here. It's one of them, but it's cool.
And you can see it through that, and you can track it over various, over the course of a week or however long it takes to wax and wane. I don't know. I don't even know.
It's 29 days.
Yeah.
29 days.
We pay attention to it closely because of how it affects our astrophotography, the light and the moon.
Absolutely.
But to build on what Laurie's saying, talking about how far light travels, it's the curiosity. If we can spark that curiosity in a child's mind, where they start asking, oh, the moon's this far and the light had to take that long to get to us. It's curiosity.
Here's an example. Like we talk about the science aspects. I've done exoplanet measurements. Now, exoplanet is a planet that goes around a star that isn't our sun.
Right.
We would be an exoplanet to another solar system.
Absolutely.
Us,
Yeah.
Saturn, I mean, but that's all it is. And the first measurement of that was done with a different method, but the first time that was done with this transiting method. And the transiting method is simple. I'm going to go ahead up to this.
Let's do it.
Because this is, we'll go back to this other stuff, but there we go.
There we go.
All this exoplanet stuff is measuring the dimming of a star due to something going in front of it. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's like you crossing across the reflection of your car that we see outside there. It's a little dimmer because you're crossing it. It's that simple, and you can measure that. And the first time it was measured professionally, at the time, was in the mid '90s, and there were scientists that said you can't even do that. There's no way you can do that. Well, with the advent of computerized optical chips, CCDs and CMOS, the sensitivity of those, you could do it. Right. And they've proved it. Is that recent? Okay, 30 years, but still, that's not very long ago. We can do it, and we've shown we can do it as amateurs. There's other amateurs, but I managed to do it a couple years ago for the first time using our equipment, and it's incredible to think about that. Say a star, plus or minus, be 400 light years away. Right. And so a planet, and these are big planets that cross very close to the star, dims that star as it crosses. But this happened 400 years ago, and we're seeing, because it's 400 light years away, it took light 400 years to travel, but I am seeing the effect of a planet dimming that brightness from 400 years ago to some predictable extent. And all this came from a satellite that NASA put up in terms of candidate, all the stuff that you find out for background. It's got to be inspiring to kids that you can do it. You can potentially do it in your backyard if your equipment's big enough and everything. But I did it in our backyard. And that whole concept of the science, we want to show to kids and show how it's accessible and inspirational potentially for either just their own knowledge or furthering it or figuring out where they are in the universe, or maybe they want to do something more with it, with education and their profession down the road. Absolutely. But that is possible, and that is cool.
That is cool. I 100% agree.
And actually, that is inspiring for me. I didn't know anything about exoplanets. Laurie said he's going to do it. I said, okay, cool. So I sat and I watched. And when you see the curve start dipping down, and it's in real time, and you know what's happening.
Our real time.
Our real time. 400 years ago, but our real time. It's incredible, and it's one of those high five moments again.
It's the chimping.
Chimping, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a new one. I don't want to know.
And there's something in this. Oh gosh, there's so much. The one thing that I was picking up on, the analogy I kind of see is, in the very same way of a solar eclipse, it's that same premise, but it's scale.
It's an eclipse.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it is.
And not full. It's not the full star.
It's totally what it is. Yeah. It's a object that's blocking light from a light source. Yeah. Crossing it, which is what the moon does when it eclipses the sun, and what these large planets do across the star that they orbit.
Yeah. And then the other element of that is that like 400 years ago aspect of it, and that kind of relationship then with history. And then in my mind, I was going back briefly to kind of the moon and just what these entities that people have seen, stars, like I just think of like 100 years ago even, or medieval times, what people would have believed, and for youth engaging with that.
Well, like, and also even farther back than that, the star explosions, the supernovae that they're seen throughout history. Yeah. The fact that we might have one in our backyard, or might have occurred because it's Betelgeuse is how far away? Anyway, it's many light years away. Right. It could have already occurred, and it's going to happen relatively close to us in terms of light years. No danger, don't worry. But it's like it's something that could happen, and it has happened in history. Yeah. Chinese astronomers saw things. In medieval times there were things, and even
when they see
before
a comet,
that, or a beautifully, and we saw one, a Neowise comet, that was visible to the naked eye a few years ago. Yeah. Kimberly's taken some incredible pictures of it back in the day. Yeah. But stuff like that is yeah, it's longer time scales, but it's there. And back to your point, the exoplanet thing we showed, if it's for, I did a presentation when I said, well, back then, this is when Shakespeare's certain play came out.
Right.
That planet was crossing that star when Shakespeare was alive. To more relate to your artistic background and your theatrical interest, you know, so Shakespeare was alive and kicking, walking around, writing notes, and this planet was crossing that star. Yeah. And now I'm measuring it. I'm in my living room, and I'm watching, because I'm doing it remotely, even before we had the observatory, and watching this trace. Yeah. And it all ties so much together when you think about the time and the distance.
Yeah, no, and that's what I think I was getting at, is that relationship that we can have with our own kind of histories as people generally on the planet through the stars. I think is
it's an expansion. It's an expansion of your consciousness. It's an expansion of what you've thought about, from what you've thought about before, just because you haven't been exposed to it. And that's the essence of what we want to do for kids, young people, adults, you know, that are motivated to do it. And we've had all sorts of groups here.
Absolutely. I think we're a bit further in the slideshow, but if we go back to the light, what can your eye see? Again, trying to break down a few of these things. And because, you know, that idea of, capturing light for art and science, if that was the phrase. Anyway, awesome, sweet. And just like, I'm not entirely sure. There's visual light I'm seeing on here, but there's stuff outside of what our eyes can capture, and if we can kind of briefly.
Well, that's part of the education, right? In school, you should be learning. There's a full electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
So from everything from really long length radio waves all the way through to through microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, all these things, they basically have higher energies too. But what we can see is just a small part of that in terms of the visible light spectrum, which is again is split up into colors that we understand, colors of the rainbow. Right. And within that are those emissions and things that we can bring out. But there's other types of astronomy. There's radio astronomy. There's X-ray astronomy. Right. You know, with other, so this we're doing visual,
right? And but there's audible.
The radio waves basically you need vast equipment, large diameter radio telescopes and arrays of those and that, because the wavelengths are so large. Yeah. And then the X-rays and the X-ray can image certain parts of the spectrum that you can't see visibly. All that kind of stuff goes into understanding the physics, the cosmology, how it all works, which is in upheaval right now mainly because of James Webb being able to see so far back in time and so far away. Yeah. But that's another topic.
Yes. And James Webb is looking at the infrared spectrum, so it's not the visible.
Yeah, and the reason James Webb is doing that is because of this redshift, because things are moving away from each other. Anyway, that's part of the physics that you should be exposed to as a young person and to understand. Even if you don't do anything with it, it's about background, right?
Yeah, and I'm just going to break this down for my own sake here. So I see wavelength in nanometer. What is a nanometer? If you had to try and explain that to somebody.
So you've got a meter. It's 1/1000th of a millionth of a meter.
Okay. Okay. So wavelength.
It's small.
Very
so
small.
that wavelengths in the visible spectrum are measured in those kind of units, right?
Yeah. And I see. So again, I'm just piecing things together as we go here. But we've talked a lot about red light, and how it's the best because it least interrupts your eye when you're doing astrophotography. But it's also the hardest to remove when editing. And I see 700. Wavelength in nanometer.
Yeah, so the red is has got a longer wavelength than the blue, right? That's just
wavelength.
And that's again back to there's photons, which is the particle interpretation of light, and there's the wave interpretation of light, which relates to wavelength and colors.
I see. Cool. Is there anything you want to add to
no, because it's too much. No, I'm just kidding. It's again, this is more like a classroom thing, right? And it's kind of neat because you're talking about you want kids to be interested. You touch on it, and then you say, oh, let's look at this. This is a real image of something. I don't know. I'm not an educator. I can only empathize with educators.
Absolutely.
But that's exactly the kind of thing you want to expose them to. But then what we want to do is show them a manifestation of what this is through a telescope.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
That slide.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
we went through that. Yeah.
Dive into it. Yes, we have touched on it briefly. I remember there's kind of 3 elements that you're kind of focusing.
There are 3 emissions that predominate. There's more than the 3, but the predominant emissions, and these are again, this is the education part. There's atomic levels of certain elements. They change states of where the electrons are, and that by doing that, they give up very specific light colors, if you like.
Right.
Very specific. And there's 2 in the red and 2 in the oxygen, in the visible spectrum, and we filter for those because they're predominant. And those are the things that show up in all of these nebula photos of either supernova remnants or other features or stellar nurseries, etc. But they predominate, and they're a source of light, very specific wavelength of light that we filter everything else out and let that pass through to get our really cool
Art.
pictures of, and that Kimberly extends into the world of art. Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the question is there, but is there anything you can add about that kind of extension into the world of art? Because it's very based in science, and so it's a very broad topic and question.
Well, I'll start it and Kimberly can finish it, because it's basically it's interpretation in terms of the color assignments and the saturation. There's other stuff too.
Sure.
Contrast with, there's dark structures that basically block other sources of light that are very cool that you can see. But in terms of emissions and the art, it's that and making that yours, making that how you want it to look.
Right. It's the artist paintbrush, basically. I've got the raw data. How do I want to paint it? How do I want to color it? All the structures and the details are there. I'm not making those up. I'm just painting in the color.
Yeah.
And then using that art to inspire somebody. Somebody walks past and sees the Bat Nebula. You get a young 12-year-old boy. And he
loves
bats.
Batman.
Exactly. And, gee, I had no idea that was out in space. Let's talk about that and how do I get that? So again, it's through art that you can inspire somebody to start looking up or to be interested in it.
Yeah.
Because you can't see that with your eye, so it requires art to bring it to life.
Yeah.
But you can see certain nebulas with your eye. Like we talk about binoculars in that Orion Nebula when it's up.
Oh yeah.
That is something so accessible.
Yeah. No, I love that, and I love it because it's kind of generally when people think of art, they think founded in imagination and fiction, whereas this is based in nonfiction. Like it's based on reality.
And then people think, oh, you're manipulating. All the structures, as Kimberly said, are real. The light sources, the things that block the light, the dust, all those are real. The art comes in how you assign the colors, if you like, and then also how much color you bring out. Her tastes, we have very similar tastes, but she's the artist. I really appreciate it. She's subtle saturations, subtle feature treatment. There's certain stuff out there, and we've all seen different kinds of art, whether it's astrophotography or other art that's kind of really in your face, saturation wise. That's not her style. It's more subtle.
Yeah, and we have some examples over here of mouse mats and stuff, and scarves and stuff. So. And
again, it's just getting the message out, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's a card that goes around the world and somebody says, "Hey," all of a sudden they see it, and it's something they've never thought of before. And I do get those comments back. I received your card from somebody, and I'm sitting in Scotland, and that inspired me to look up and go check out the aurora.
Yeah.
It's just about inspiration.
And there are a lot of people doing astrophotography right now that were inspired by, well, I don't know, things they saw online or whatever. Mainly, obviously, older people, adults, but they've got into the hobby and they're doing it, and they're excited by what they're doing, and it's really a whole world that even if a kid wants to do that and get into a hobby, even if he doesn't go anywhere professionally or educated, it's a really neat thing, an additional activity that's mind-opening.
Yeah, mind-opening, like you said, expanding your kind of consciousness and awareness.
Yeah.
And Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I had another thought, and it's right on the tip of my tongue, and I'm forgetting it right now.
You're getting old. That's what I do. No, I'm just kidding. That's what I do that all the time.
But no, so you were just talking about how, it's completely gone.
It'll come back.
That's okay.
It'll come back if
Next
it's meant
segment.
to, for sure. Yeah,
There's so much good stuff in there. It's
absolutely.
all coming up. So,
What do we have up here, just on the screen?
Oh, that's just a culmination of
Yeah,
a bunch of
Again,
picture taking.
Talking about the
processing.
paintbrush.
right.
So my brush strokes on that to bring out the pinks and the blues.
No,
Yeah.
awesome. Cool. Fantastic. I think that is all the time we have for this segment. I wish I remembered what my last question or thought was there, but it's gone, so we'll let it go. No, I'm determined to get this. One second. It had to do with expanding your consciousness and awareness, and it had to do with youth again, and potentially like the items. Maybe I got distracted by the items. Youth.
I love this. He's on the spot, not us. It's great.
Yeah, I know. And
I
trying to,
totally empathize with what you're going through.
and I'm trying to.
I go through it 6 or 7 times a week.
And I'm trying to use the persistence, it's not going to beat you, but it just might, honestly. My mind might get the better of me here.
But it is about inspiring youth
Yes.
and opening their minds. And it's about exposure, not ramming stuff down their throats, which many of them are interpreting their classroom experience to be for, not because teachers are bad, because that's just how kids are. It's a structured environment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. We will leave it there. I love that. It's on inspiration. And that is all the time we have for this segment. So thank you so much again for your time and wisdom and input. This has been the Windy City's Finest, on location with Clark and Perry. I'm Perry. He's Clark, and this is Kimberly.
Of Seven Skies Astronomy. I'm very excited to kind of like delve into a little bit of the meat and the potatoes here, as well as we kind of dive into, I guess, Kimberly, you summarized this well, like more of a progression to what you might see, or once you're finished the night photography workshop as well. So this is kind of like, what do we have here, Laurie, in front of us?
Well, the equipment that was used in the Milky Way workshop is standard equipment. It's tripod, camera, and it's all still. This is just a kind of a one level up from that, but it's also a direct link to the observatory kind of stuff that we see behind us.
Right.
It's a tripod, it's got an extension on it, and it's got a setup that is an equatorial mount, just like the observatory equipment is. Okay. So it's really the next step up from in terms of this scale of doing the Milky Way work with still cameras on a still tripod. This will actually move and track just like this big boy.
Amazing.
And allow you to take longer exposures. And then kind of as your first footstep into tracked astrophotography, and you can then go to look at doing telescopes or whatever. It's just a simple mount. It's a few $100s, but it does exactly the same kind of thing, trying to counteract the rotation of the Earth, keep things still in the frame.
And that just is able to compound your scalability or your distance or your reach that you're able to achieve. Is
right.
That right?
And you can start doing astrophotography. Again, this is just a standard camera lens combination. On top of this, there's some attachments that cost a little bit, but basically in addition to this, and you'll see some similarities. You'll see this is an angle, right? So basically this axis here is the same as this axis here, and they basically point to the celestial pole very near Polaris, the North Star, that you want to center on for your rotation to counteract, to get your frame still with respect to the universe.
Right.
And the Milky Way, if that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's exactly the same kind of thing as this, and this, so it rotates this way, follow that, and then makes refinements with this axis, just like this one. This is a different orientation right now, but you notice some similarities. We've got a counterweight.
Yep.
Counterweight. There's some really cool new mounts, like the one behind me, that don't require counterweights, but this is kind of just the next step to doing this still photography, and you can move it around, and you can use your phone actually to do this.
Right.
So I don't have a computer or anything. I've got a telephone or a phone Android or iPhone, whatever, and I can move the mount however we want to move it, to target, to do alignment, to do anything else.
Amazing. So,
And
like, when you're moving this right now, and when we talk about targeting, I know that a lot of people might get a little confused on, like, specific coordinates or anything like that. When you're talking about targeting, it's literally just like, I see that up in the night
you
sky.
can do that. You can just do that. But
Yeah.
you should really need to put input. You basically want to polar align this, because then you know that this axis is acting in the sense of counteracting your rotation of the Earth. And then you want to do a couple things called syncing. So you take a couple of target stars and you'll sync it, and then it'll basically have a model that's input into this, so it knows where it is approximately.
Right.
And this is great for shorter focal length.
Yep.
So anything from the Milky Way type 14, 15 millimeter, all the way on up to maybe 150 millimeter, even 200, which is a 70 to 200 lens. And that'll be good enough to do that kind of polar aligning. We have a little attachment back here. You can do a red dot finder and do that. And there's various techniques, and you can add on sophistication beyond this.
Of whatever your preferences were as
Right,
well, too.
right.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, so basically you polar align it, and then you go, like I can show down here, there's an app, and you can hit the star that you want. You go to a named star, and you go, okay, I want to see Betelgeuse. And then you go to, and it'll move there.
So it already has those preloaded coordinates.
Once you've synced it and done all that good stuff, it'll do that.
Yeah, because I think that was like around my question of just like how specific could you get in that application?
Yeah,
for
it's a
this
simple
type
couple
rig?
of steps.
Yeah.
So you can use bright objects like the moon if they're up, or a bright star that you know where it is. You can use you've got apps that are planetarium programs on here to identify them, separate apps, and so you can get a little familiar with that. All part of the learning curve, but once you can put in a 1 or 2 or 3 star alignment,
Right.
and you'll know approximately where you are. Then you go, you know where you are. It knows where you are. Also, your physical location on the Earth, because you need to have that input, either automatically or entered directly.
Yep.
So you know how to counteract, how the mountain knows how to counteract that rotation. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's different depending where you are latitude-wise.
That is amazing. Yeah, and
So it's a
so much
simple
to
thing.
think about as well too. Like I really appreciated Kimberly. You showed us like the last the last part of the segment where we essentially just kind of line up like physically, but this is kind of that again. I really appreciate.
You could
this
take
next
this
step.
and follow the Milky Way. Or follow part of the Milky Way.
That's right. And so we talked about light gathering. So
Yeah.
when we had our 16 millimeter lens, I could have the shutter open for 20 seconds
Right.
and gather light. If I did the same 20 seconds at 200 mils, my stars would all be trailed. They would be moving.
Right.
So in order to gather 20 seconds of light, I need to counteract the Earth's rotation with this type of a mount.
Right.
So all this allows you to do is take slightly deeper Milky Way pictures, but expose for long enough to gather the light.
Gotcha.
Right now at 200 millimeters, I'd only be able to expose for 2 seconds, and I'm not going to get enough light at 2 seconds.
Okay.
Which would mean I'd have to go back to my pillars again of astrophotography and bump up my ISO to ridiculous. Now it's getting really grainy. So how do
Right.
we overcome that? How do we get the light? We use one of these mounts that allows us to have the shutter open for longer periods of time, 1 minute, 2 minutes, to gather that light without star movement.
Again, it's that next step to keep the camera as still as possible to the point where you need to counteract the Earth's rotation as well too. Okay, that is fantastic as
Yeah,
well.
but it's all the base equipment that you'd already have. It's a camera, attached lens, and again, it's a tripod with a little extension on it, and something called a wedge, which we talk about. It creates the angle to allow that tracking rotation to occur properly.
Right. Yeah. So this tech here is pretty much the simple stuff that most folks could have access to. Again, it's that next step already.
Yeah.
From the first phase there. When it comes to the telescopic lens here, how large can they get when it comes to this setup before you would consider going to something even bigger?
About this large.
About
this
this
is a 70 to 200 lens.
Yeah.
So up to 200 millimeter focal length.
And it's on the weight as well. So if you've got a very light lens, you can maybe go a little bit longer. But this mount can only work with that weight up to, is it 10 pounds that we go?
Yeah,
More than
roughly.
10?
Yeah, you can put more weight on. But
Yeah. Okay.
again, this is a very, lightweight kind of mount. This is the kind of mount we took to Tanzania when we went.
Right.
And we put the carbon fiber refractor on it, much bigger than this, but light, and allowed us to do some astrophotography there.
So you folks at Seven Skies Astronomy as well, I know that you folks have like the very large setups that we've had a chance to kind of feature as well too. But like, would this setup here like be of your personal like preference to like, do you folks use this as well still in your practice, or is it now come to this level?
Kimberly's used this.
I still use this. I will do some deep Milky Way where it's too, I want it wider. I'm looking at a 70 mil, 90 mil, maybe 100 mil. So, you know, a frame like this, if I get into one of the telescopes, I'm at 400 mils. So I'm really zooming in. So yes, I do use a setup in the driveway. We're also trying to encourage people to, you know, bring your camera and your lens, and we can strap it on here and show you before you buy this.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, like tutorials like this, I think, have been so fantastic for me to like kind of assess like, okay, what are all the pieces, components, and then factors that I'm dealing with to justify why I'm getting those pieces. Because there's so much science behind it. We've had the chance to feature, and like so much reasoning, so many parts and pieces and things to consider that bring it all together, I find.
Again, this is the path where you're doing your own photography, you want to progress and get deeper and do things more on your own. There are new products out there, there's a variety of them that basically they're things you can plunk on the ground, make it basically level, hit a button, and it'll align itself and you can put in targets. And they're cool, but they're like small aperture, and they do automatic stacking, and then they'll spit out an image, which is really cool to do it quickly, and it's inspiring, and it can be another thing you do, but that'll only go so far. This is kind of a step in the direction of doing the much more sophisticated, and eventually, if you want to go crazy like this, something imaging like, you know, with large equipment, etc. That you could do.
So when it comes to putting this together, and like, did you have to specifically find a certain tripod built for like these attachments as well?
It requires, anybody can do internet searches and look at this stuff. This is kind of a base level equatorial mount. There's a variety of them now, different ones, different price levels. This is probably the least expensive kind of one there is. More of a traditional gear type assembly, but you can go on up in price even for these small things. But again, I brought this one out because this is kind of this is a few $100s of mount and tripod together. A little bit more for these attachments, but you can, and there's a battery, but you can use different power sources to get your 12-volt torch. In fact, this one actually has the capability of using 8 AA batteries if you want to do it. It doesn't give you a huge amount of time, maybe the better part of a night, but you can actually do that completely portably.
But in a pinch, you could just go to the quick boot of your car and see if you could rummage it around into some battery life as well too. No, that's fantastic.
And again, they're building new ones all the time that are smaller, that are capable. It's understanding what you're doing, like from the still photography part and its limitations to getting into some basic tracking. And these are the kind of the next level up from just doing still.
Yeah. Could we, like, this is just a personal curiosity thing that we have in front of us. What is this here for?
That's a weight bag.
Right.
So it adds stability. So when we were in Tanzania, I took a piece of Tanzania, this boulder, and stuck it in there as weight. And so it just gives you more stability.
Right. Okay.
So
that makes
if you're worried about, motion, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah.
And it builds on what we talked about in the last workshop where I said you need a sturdy tripod. This is just one more way of making the tripod even more sturdy, adding a little weight to it.
Fantastic.
Wind isn't going to blow it around. It's not going to wobble.
Yeah. And then when, again, talking about scalability here, so the next level after a few stones is that you make a whole concrete.
Yeah, you use the earth as the stone.
Exactly. No, that's fantastic. Okay, perfect. No, thank you so much. I'm hoping, Laurie, if it's okay, if maybe we show off or feature some direct comparisons between the large setup that we have here and in comparison with
we'll start with the wedge. This is what we call a wedge, which is just the tilting structure that creates the tilt that allows you to make this axis, basically the imaginary line that goes through this axis, point to the celestial pole.
Right.
So if we are on the equator, that thing would basically be horizontal. If we're at the North Pole, it would be straight up.
Okay, perfect.
So that's the thing that allows you to scale for where you are on your latitude, so your north-south positioning, whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. So this one's fixed because we're never going to move it from our location here because it's a permanent location. This one, so the wedge here, you can see the wedge. It's variable. I can loosen this and I can move this, and I will, just to show you. You can move it up and down.
Perfect.
So depending where your latitude. So you travel to the States or Tanzania, which is 3 degrees south of the equator, you can actually move this.
So, and where is information like that available as well too? Is it just like a quick couple internet searches, or like do you have to get super specific?
There's, without advertising, there's basic astrophotography books that tell you about polar aligning, all the stuff we've kind of alluded to about tracking and counteracting the rotation of the Earth. Kids are probably better at it than anybody by searching, doing those kind of searches. There's blogs, none of which I'm going to say. There's good parts about blogs and internet communities to do it, and they're easy enough to find.
Yeah, the information is accessible.
But yeah, look up astrophotography basics, and whole bunch of stuff will come out.
Yeah,
and there's a few good books.
Getting back to the wedge, though, it's where your latitude is, right? You can look that up. You just use your cell phone. It's going to tell you what your latitude is. Laurie has these set for that one is set for 49. Those are fixed, but it's 49 degrees.
Yeah, where we are is just over 49 degrees north latitude.
So if you have the variable one, you just need to find out where you are on latitude and then dial that in.
Dial it in.
Oh, okay, perfect. So it's the right, yes, and just making sure that I have it in my context as well too, the latitude or where you are. North-south to the Earth as well too.
Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Excellent. All right.
And then so that's that. So there's two axes here. This is a rotational axis this way.
Yep.
This is a rotational axis this way, just like these two are. This is oriented differently because we have to have the roof down because it's windy outside. But if I were to make this orientation the same as this and have the telescope pointing up, like the camera is, this weight would be down. Those axes would be in the same orientation as these two.
Right. Okay.
And so that's the relationship. And it's exactly the same thing you're trying to do. Except that's extremely accurate for heavy things. This is excellent for anything up to, say, a couple 100 millimeters of focal length that's light enough.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Excellent. And it looks like we have a pretty, it looks like to me, when first glance, it looks like a very sophisticated setup as well too. And it still is, but I really appreciate kind of just breaking it down a little bit and kind of going into.
So everything's normal up to here, like to here. There's a tube extension, and then this is the wedge attachment, and then this is the mount part, just like those.
Perfect. Are you able to comment on any, are there any experiences or stories or any learnings that you had experienced, either of you two, that helped kind of grow this foundational knowledge for most of this?
Well, we can talk about our Tanzanian experience because we went, first of all, going near the equator is crazy. If you think about polar aligning, what you want to do is get the celestial pole either north or south. Your ability to see it, so you can align on the celestial pole. If you're near the equator, and we were 3 degrees south of the equator, we basically had to guess a lot and get right near the horizon. Because the thing, you're on the equator and you want to get to the celestial pole. Yeah. Like I said, you're basically looking horizontally in whatever direction. And so polar aligning down south was a bit of guesswork.
Yeah.
But there's with this kind of equipment, there's a little room for error because you're using shorter focal lengths. But it's cool. But Kimberly took a picture, for example, of a star trail in Tanzania, where here, if you do a star trail, which is basically leaving your camera fixed and exposing it different times to see the trail of the stars. It's like this circle is transcribed, right? Or a bunch of circles. In Tanzania, she did it, and it's basically a bunch of lines. There's a little curvilinear on the outside, it's all straight line because we're right at the equator and we're moving with the stars in that direction. So that's one of the stories. But the polar aligning is a challenge near the equator.
No, that's perfect. No, I really appreciate obviously sharing those experiences as well too. Have there been like any quick tips that we have to keep in mind for people maybe with this type of setup that are looking to kind of like go out on their first venture?
Practice with it in the backyard.
Yeah. And I do that too, because I don't use it very often, so I always get a tutorial from Laurie about putting it back together again and making sure how to line up due north and then doing the stars. Even if it's daylight, just practice. It doesn't matter. You don't actually need the star. You just need to make sure that you can move the telescope to where theoretically that star is during daylight.
Well, actually, when you pointed it towards Betelgeuse, I was like, wow, we're going to see where it is. And I was like, yeah, okay. It's kind of,
is there.
Yeah, it probably is there. We just can't see it during the daytime as well. So, no, that's perfect. That's perfect as well. I'm going to go and check with Perry here to see if there was any chatted comments or anything like that. There doesn't seem to be. That's okay. Yeah, no, this is excellent. So, like, I guess going back to some of the weights here, I could understand that there would be like probably some marketed like very specific weights or sandbags or something like that. With this pouch here, it doesn't necessarily have to be like. How much weight would I be putting in this realistically?
Probably 5 pounds at the most. You could put your camera bag in there.
Well, you could put up to 20 pounds if you wanted to, something like that.
Yeah, but just for stability, it doesn't have to be really heavy, and you don't have to buy the bag. Some people will even hang their camera bags from there. That's not the best because it might sway around a little bit.
Right, and this is more of that stable
Again,
option
this is not the most robust equipment for anything heavy, but you're not trying to do something with heavy equipment with this.
Yeah.
This is a plunk and play. You can get it set up in 15 minutes and you can get imaging right away.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
With practice.
With practice, yes. Okay. That's excellent. Excellent. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a little bit more that we can kind of explore when it comes to maybe a little bit more explanation when it comes to the distance that we have or capability. Kind of in a scale of when we were doing the our previous segment with the night sky photography. We have this with a little bit more of deeper space, and then in comparison to obviously this large setup, is there a little bit that we can comment on or talk about there?
Again, it's about light gathering, really.
Mm-hmm.
How much light can you gather through the aperture that you have? I could put my 16 mil lens on here, my 15 mil lens, and expose for 2 minutes while it's rotating with the Earth, and I'm going to start gathering some of the nebulosity that I wouldn't see in the 20 seconds.
Right.
So it's really just about light gathering and how long you can keep the shutter open.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get too long a focal length, beyond the weight problem, if it gets to be a piece of heavy lens, you get too long a focal length, then you're going to, any little deviations that the kind of the entry-level equipment can cause or not eliminate, you'll begin to pick up. So you get beyond 400 or 500 millimeters of focal length, something say that size.
Right.
These mounts will reach their limit of what they can achieve.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of, you could hear that one. There's gears in it. It's louder. It's not like the other ones where it's very quiet. Yeah, we can move it again. But there are, with those worm gears, there's always going to be, it'll roll, and then it'll give, and it'll roll, and it'll give. So when you have a longer focal length, those little gives are going to show up. They're going to be magnified.
Right. Yeah. Okay. No, that's totally fair as well too. So another factor to kind of keep in mind as well. I had another thought as well. If we could talk again, just maybe because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to be speaking on this in particular. But in regards to the workshop, we had talked about the noise to signal ratio. I'm kind of curious to know if that is still as large of a factor when it comes to this setup, and like what its relationship is with the longer distance photos as well.
Absolutely. So we talked about that a little bit. If I were to put this out there, the most I could do is a 2-second exposure on my flat tripod. Right. So I'm not gathering enough signal.
Yeah.
By putting it on here and being able to expose for 20 seconds or even 2 minutes, I'm gathering more and more signal. So it's always about signal to noise. That is what drives astrophotography, is that signal to noise ratio.
Amazing. And could we just elaborate a little bit more on what the noise may be? We did just talk about and we can hear it, I'm sure, just on the mics right now when it comes to the actual audible noise. But when it comes to signal noise, what exactly is that?
So again, with my DSLR strap back there, it's not cooled. So when I'm exposing for 2 minutes, I'm going to have electronic noise. I'm going to have all those hot pixels that start coming into the photo with 2 minutes. So I'm trying to overcome those hot pixels by getting longer and longer exposures. We've pushed this mount to probably 10 minutes. I don't suggest doing that. That is just too long. We run into all kinds of problems and a lot of tears on my part.
Yeah.
So in that 2 to 3 minute range is optimal with that sort of a focal length.
Gotcha. Okay. Excellent. And that varies with the difference. The different focal lengths that we encounter and experience as well too. No, that's perfect. Excellent. So like they can obviously be powered by many different pieces and objects of equipment as well too. Oh, sorry, Perry, you got something?
I just have a quick question in relation to, in the same way that Milky Way workshops, people have a variety of equipment. Where does this stand in relation to people that maybe come and stay and do this kind of on-site with you and their portable deep space setups?
Yeah, we haven't done a bunch of that. There's so much equipment now, so many different kinds of equipment now. To be expert in all of it is impossible. And we're happy to talk to people about principles and all that kind of stuff. We haven't really endeavored to go into that. There's a lot of online resources about that. Down the road, maybe we'll do some kind of workshops for more advanced astrophotography. It's, again, as we talked about before, it's very complex to do it in the kind of way that we've become to do it. It's a very intense learning experience. A lot of it is, you could talk about the principles, but a lot of that stuff is basically available online. Again, it's about weeding through what's not important versus what's important and what your goals are, obviously, in your astrophotography. Like our friends we'll talk about it amongst. So that's the whole idea of this group dynamic with astrophotography community and learning between people from more experienced people. And again, it's one of the things is if you're inexperienced at this, acknowledge that to yourself and understand what you don't know and listen to people. Like we talked about this before, start with a short focal length, basic equipment, learn, make your mistakes, do that while referencing what's available for information.
Right.
And to learn that. But if people are looking for, this by rote, progression, there's astrophotography books you can look at and do that. And even the sophisticated ones are out of date already. Things that were written 5 years ago because of the new and the mounts and all this kind of stuff, and the new CMOS cameras and the noise, the low noise levels they can achieve.
Yeah.
But there's basics that you can talk to people about. We haven't done that for this kind of work yet. We may, I don't know, we'll see. But we've all done that as part of a community, understand how that may or may not work. But the thing is, as somebody that's doing it new, you have to listen and open your mind.
Yeah.
You can't jump into getting into something like that and expect somebody to teach you how to use it.
Yeah, that's right.
You could do that. You could hire somebody, right? Somebody wants to pay me a ridiculous amount of money, I'll do it. But it's a progression.
Yeah, it would be much easier.
It's like going to university for 4 years.
Yeah.
And taking a bunch of different courses. The amount of time you have to spend to do it between the theory and the practice is immense.
You can't just go to one workshop and expect to know the entire struggles or journeys and learnings that you've had. You've just opened yourself up to an opportunity to learn and to take that step.
Yeah.
To
and what we're showing with this is a kind of a neat first step. If people want to go beyond the Milky Way still photography, this is how you can do it. That's accessible.
And even the Milky Way workshops like you're talking about, I have people that come back year after year to do them because they took away something in the first one, but they always learn something new. So even on the wide field photography, it's a progression, it's learning.
Yeah, excellent. No, I appreciate that. That's perfect. Awesome. All right. So if we were to summarize just the basic components here, we have the camera, we have the lens, we have the equatorial mount. I got it. Excellent. And then we have the tripod here with a little bit of stability and, of course, a battery just off to the side as well, too. Excellent. Like, essentially, we're pretty much ready to go. We would just need a little bit more experience when it comes to the app to find where our target is going to be as well.
And we want to put a cable release or whatever.
And a cable release as well,
basically,
too.
you can take astrophotography pictures with this kind of a setup.
Excellent. All right. Well, I really appreciate the kind of the compare and contrast that we've had. It sounds like we had a really great experience talking about like essentially the level 1, and now we have the level 2, and right behind us, of course, is the great and big featured level 3 piece as well too. Perry is going to come in and get a nice little close-up view of that movement as well. I am amazed every single day, especially even with our experience, like Perry and I's experience when it comes to live streaming technology. But like this has just been kind of blowing me out of the water the entire time as well too. Just the capabilities and the actual technical pieces involved as well. So. Excellent. For those of you tuning in on the live stream as well, thank you so much for doing so. If you had any other comments or questions that you weren't able to kind of get in, throw them into the chat or comment on the video as well too, because we'll be sure to kind of pose them to you lovely folks as well in post if need be. But for those of you that are on TELUS Optic TV or on the YouTube channel as well, please give it a like and subscribe, because these folks have just put in so much work as well, and we would love to feature them again, hopefully in the future. But that's all the time that we have right now in this segment, so thank you again so much. This has been the Windy City's Finest on location with Clark and Perry. I'm Clark, he's Perry,